efficiencies is really left up to the company that we're outsourcing with.
Let me comment on that a little bit. If you think about it, what were the components of the fee before? The biggest component was our labor cost. But then there were other components that are always thrown in. The cost of this building, the cost of the building across the street, the debt service if there is any. All of these and sometimes there is, but all these components figure into it. How much did you pay the city attorney? Well, that figures in all the other costs that go into this barrel that are then allocated to different areas. The cost that we pay, what we pay the contractor, is a fee. That's a direct fee. That's kind of somewhat equal to, or in concept, to what our labor costs were before. We're paying somebody else to provide the labor to do it. But all the other infrastructure costs, will play into it. Staff is also equally interested in what that would do to the fee that we charge, because it could adjust it downward or upward. We don't know. And that's one of the interesting reasons why we're looking forward to this fee study as well, is because it will give us a better handle. The percentage will still stay the same. We don't see that changing contractually, we don't. But at the same time, the amount of the fee that we charge, we have to make sure that it's rationally and legally based.
We also need to make sure that our burden rate on the contract that we have is appropriate, because we may be cheating ourselves on the split that we have, and so when the contract could come up for renewal, we may want to adjust it in accordance. So I think it'd be good information for us to have.
So, well, one other comment. It just seemed like this was a very broad brush with boilerplate type of proposal, contract that had stuff in it that didn't pertain to Atherton. So I was concerned that it was not tailor-made for our little town of residential only. And if that is what's being given to us at the onset, it just seemed like it might compile other oversights or mistakes as we go along. So did NBS, did we go out for proposals on this?
Yeah, I will admit, this was done, the RFP process was just kind of finishing up when I got on board. And so I hadn't followed up until, last month or the month before on really getting started on this project. I worked with a team of staff to review the proposals that we had received. We went back to a couple of the consultants that we picked as the finalists to check and see if they were still interested in the project, and they were. And this is the firm that we selected that we thought would be the best match. So I wasn't involved in the RFP process. Okay. Alternatively with the proposal for property tax, I did get their first proposal and say, wait a minute, we don't have a redevelopment agency. Can you make sure that your proposal is addressing the town of Atherton and not another city? So I've considered that type of thing. But to answer your other question, the other fees, planning fees will be looked at. There's fees in the police department that we charge. So it'll be pretty comprehensive. We have a master fee schedule and we want to update the majority of the user fees that are on there.
Are we legally required to do it at this date and time?
At the risk of sounding strange, we're probably late, just guessing.
It's been since 2009. It's what?
You have to theoretically keep it current, but I don't know of anybody that does it annually. But there are some places that I'm aware of, bigger cities, that have auditors and things on staff that they do adjust some of these fees to meet the changes in the economy. I think that since 2009 till now, the way the statutes read is it's a reasonable estimate of your cost. There's no such thing as exact. So if the economy worsens severely over a period of time, it may be that your fees need to be downsized to reflect actual costs and things out there. So I don't think there's exactly a statutory time period that you have to do it. I'd defer to Deborah, but I do think that since 2009, a lot of things have changed with the economy and Prop 26 and a few other things that make us say it's a really good idea.
As well as with our town structure.
And when you hire consultants like this, they are trying to create a model for you that the town can update. And there are certain assumptions in there that the town can put in and update. Now, this RFP was put together very soon after the reorganization of the town. So I think it was the intention to say that we have had some staffing changes, we have changed the way we do business, let's take a look at it. And it's just taken a little while for us to get the project underway.
I would just hate to spend a lot of money with a brand-new consultant, and that is exactly what the other consultant did, was to create a model that was supposed to have been able to be updated and plug in new numbers and new assumptions, and then we'd be able to spit some new, up-to-date information out. So I am just wondering why we didn't talk back to that firm.
If you think about what the changes that occurred a year ago,
Mhm.
there's no model that could have anticipated that drastic a change with respect to, I mean, you think about it, 1 year we're $800,000 going one way, and the next year we're pretty much breaking even. There is a fundamental shift in the whole paradigm that we're using to determine how we charge fees. And I think that even the other, any consultant you would have brought in would look at it and say, you've changed the rules, we need to start over. I mean, we changed the rules in a very, very significant way.
Okay. No more questions right now.
Any public comments?
Deja vu,
Hello.
2009.
Yeah.
First of all, I really want to, excuse me, Carol Flaherty, 10 Camino por las Armas. Thank you, Elizabeth. I want to applaud you all for the tremendous work that you and the City Council have done getting our fiscal house back in order. I really wasn't too optimistic about it a year or two ago. I thought we were in really, really, really serious trouble. And you did a great job putting aside, differences and doing what was really right for the town. So kudos and thank you very much. And it's not been easy, especially when, the town residents were divided. What should we do about the staff, the labor, outsourcing, et cetera? But you made the right decisions. We're in much better shape. Because of those very dramatic changes, we have had a material impact in the cost structure of the town. And Bill's right. We have to do a new cost study to determine what the new cost structure is. That's one reason. There's a second reason that you all don't know about. My husband John and I are building a new project on Atherton Avenue. I wrote a protest letter in October, and I wrote a protest letter in January, and we hired Walt McNeil to sue you. Because our building permit was valued on $4 million, that's the building permit calculation. The house is actually costing $2 million. So our permit cost was 2 times more because of the valuation than it should have been. And part of the problem is our old concern, and that is the fee for the per square foot of the uninhabitable space. But in a bigger scheme of things, when I looked at this, last year I pulled how many building permits had Atherton issued. And the issue isn't new construction. There were 335 building permits last year, of which only 22 were for new houses. The master fee schedule is so important because, I do have 3 minutes, right? Thank you. Okay. Because it has the potential for impacting so many. So instead of suing you, which we would have had to do in May, I came and I met with Bill and said, this is crazy. We've had too many lawsuits in this town. There is no cost basis for the building permit fees today that's legitimate, and you do have to do one every year. You're supposed to do a cost study by California law. Let's just kind of put that stuff to the side. Let's just get this cost study done and see where it shakes out, not for John and Carol Flaherty, but for the town, and what's really right on these costs. And I want to remind you all, back with MBS, I think we paid him $51,000. I'd be shocked if we could get through this at $20,000. I think you should do the cost study, by the way. I'm in full support. I think you have to do it. Because Bill and I have a little agreement on the side also that we're not going to sue you while we're waiting for this cost study to be done. But I want to remind you about that janitor that was $237 under the MBS study. I don't think so. I want to remind you about a fence, a review of a fence. According to the master fee schedule would be 2 hours minimum review for a fence. So I still think we have some inherent problems in the work that MBS did, but the biggest problem is that was based on an entirely different city staff and cost structure than we have now, and I wish we could go back and use those models, but it's so different that I really don't see how. So thank you so much. I'm delighted you're doing the cost study, and I hope you will do it as quickly as possible. And thank you.
Any other public comments? Seeing none, we'll close public comments, come back to the council. Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion then?
I move we adopt.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, okay. So, sorry, I shut my door. Okay, we're on 15. Jerry, you had some questions on Marsh Road.
Well, there was, on page 11, there were 3 options for payment that were listed there. I don't know if they were listed there for the council to make a decision on, or to provide you with our thoughts about, or exactly what, but my thoughts would be that as the work proceeds, that it would be a monthly review of the work that's done to make sure it's performed satisfactorily, and to conserve cash and pay for the whole project at the end of it.
Mr. Mayor, can
if there's
I
no-
save
if
Mr.
there's no-
Carlson a whole bunch of trouble?
If there are no financing charges.
Sure.
Please note that this document that you're referring to is a sample consultant agreement. It's not really the real one. I don't know why we put these in there, because they're really just designed to give the contractor kind of a flavor. But in the end, what happens is, when this comes back to me, I use a document that's very close to this, but it's not this one. And it is tailored for a design professional service in this case, because this is not, for instance, this talks about prevailing wages. There are no prevailing wages for design consultants. And so this was something that went out, so I can't unring that bell, but I can assure you that many of the provisions in there, for instance, the options, we will select the option, not the consultant, and we will, working with Mike and his staff and me, we will draft the contract in a way that best looks out for the city's interests. And as I told the mayor today, I've let these go out over time, the samples, because it's pretty common that, the contractors like to see kind of what are you using, or what can I expect. But they expect us to change this to fit the actual design, because this went out originally, I believe, Mike, as a design build, or we talked about some other phases of this.
No, it went out like this, and one of the reasons also to provide, as the city attorney is saying, is that we do want to provide these samples to the consultants or contractors, to give them an opportunity to declare if they have any issues or concerns. Typically, it could be in their indemnification language. So, as part of the review, we want to know that as well, because we want to know if there's going to be any things that the town won't be able to live without. So that's part of the review that we did.
Well, I don't know quite how to respond to this. I understand your reasons for sending it out as a sample and so forth, but why is it in our council book as a sample here? I mean,
It is technically part of the RFP, which the council's asked us to provide you with. And so we provided you with the RFP that we sent out, which starts on page 4, and that sample contract is included in the RFP we sent out. So since the council asked for it in the past, we provided it.
In the future, we'll exclude the sample contract.
They are confusing.
I am going to go ahead and ask a couple other questions. So the sample contract talks about inspection being performed by a project manager. Do we have, who's going to actually be doing the inspection of this project?
This contract will not cover inspection. The inspection will come in the subsequent, at the time that we actually have a construction project.
Interesting. I'm going to stop asking questions because I don't know what we'd be voting on here, really.
I'll just follow up. In general,
Page 21 is really what we're talking about.
Go ahead. Excuse that man.
Excuse us.
Okay.
So in general, our town policy is that when a contract is finalized between a consultant like this, you tailor-make it to protect the town and do the best for the town. As council members, we want to understand the policy that, you know, like Councilmember Paulson was saying, to conserve cash, our payment option would be not to pay up front, obviously, or not to pay without the being completed to our satisfaction. So I guess that's where we depend upon the staff to make those good decisions for us. However, I am, in recent memory, we're dealing with another contract on a very large project up Fletcher Ridge that the staff, the city attorney, the works director signed a contract that didn't include a key element of,
Attorney's fees clause.
that protected us.
That will
And
not
so,
happen in this contract.
so we have to have trust in our current staff that, we're gonna be protected. So I guess that's the bottom line, Jerry.
Any other questions? Okay, I have some questions if I could jump. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Okay. First off, I'm happy that we're moving ahead, thinking about doing something on Marsh Road, because for years, this council has looked at and said, yeah, Marsh Road, we need to do something, the road's gonna fall into the channel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, oh, how much is it gonna cost? Oh, it's too much, so it'll fall below the line. It falls below the line, so of course our capital plan and, this project is actually getting some things started up, and so I appreciate that. So that said, I think that the numbers that are here are very, very high, and so I'd like to discuss those. And I would start with the recommendation. So I appreciate that we're seeing the RFP. Of course, we want to see the RFP before they get sent out, not before. That's what the purchasing policy says, although that was done before this purchasing policy, before we finalized the purchasing policy. Although I think in good faith, we could have actually seen it beforehand. The request here is to say, hey, let the city manager go execute the contract. And normally, in the past, we actually see the contract and then we approve it. And so this one, while it says $92,000, it later on goes and says that, well, actually, really to do this is $204,000, so it's almost $205,000, which is a big chunk of change. And I think that, just saying, hey, give you carte blanche and go negotiate the contract and we trust you, I think that we have an obligation to the taxpayers to, to actually cast eyes over the contract and make sure it's right. So moving on to that, I guess, this thing was looked at, and, you sent the RFP out. There were some requirements in it that I'm gonna go over with you in a minute, but one of the requirements, I guess specifically, it said, give us your input on projects that you've done that are very, very similar, and give us some references so we kind of know how you did about it. And Mike, you and I spoke yesterday about this project, and you gave me, a reason, one of the key reasons why you felt we selected this contractor was because of, could you just summarize that?
Well, it's because, and again, we received 3 proposals for this project. And we felt that this, and we had 4 people evaluating the proposals. And in the opinion of 3 out of the 4, we ranked this Biggs Cardozo as the #1 ranked firm. The one evaluator that didn't ranked actually Siegfried as the #1 firm with Biggs Cardozo as the second rank. But as a team of evaluators, we all agreed that Biggs Cardozo would be the preferred consultant.
And you felt that because?
Because in their proposal, their scope of work was the most complete. As part of the scope work also, they identified that they would identify different alternatives, which we thought was important, because in fact, there's probably about 5 or 6, possibly 7 different ways you can do this. Each alternative is going to have an impact, because it comes with a different cost. It's going to come with different requirements as far as environmental review. It comes with different requirements in terms of regulatory permitting, in terms of impact to the traffic on Marsh Road, in terms of whether or not right-of-way would be required, because the type of construction would require getting into private property. So we felt that because there was, it was important to take a look at different alternatives. And so that was a very important part of the selection of this consultant, and also we feel a very important part as far as the scope of work, because as part of the scope of work, once we do identify these different alternatives, the pros and cons, then we would come back to council with a recommendation. And then based on the council recommendation, we proceed to complete this particular phase 1 scope, which would be a 35% design. And we felt that was important because at that point you can get a little bit more refined in your cost estimate. So we knew from a budgetary standpoint where we stood.
And so, and are they just a prime contractor and they have a team behind them, or are they doing the whole thing?
No, in this particular one, it's basically, there's 2 consultants. Biggs Cardosa is the prime, and their primary expertise and experience is in these structures. And then BKF is the other company, and they were there to do basically the general civil engineering. And from a dollar value standpoint, it's about half and half actually, as far as how much Biggs Cardosa, the value of what they will be doing as opposed to BKF.
Okay. So thanks. Yeah, so that answers one of my questions, because as I went through their statement of work, what they responded, they'd indicated they had other names of companies down there, and I didn't see anywhere in the write-up where it said that actually we hired a consortium. I realize the contract that we're gonna have is gonna say, you can have all the subs you want, but you're being held responsible as the prime contractor, but there were a series of other representatives in there with tasks associated with it, so I appreciate you clearing that up for me. A key part of the evaluation is the, half of it was, hey, tell us how you're qualified and the types of jobs you've done, and what that's relevant with us, and then of course there's references, and of course what we're really looking for is not only their resumes but also guarantee that they've actually done the job right. And one of the requirements was that they had to give us 4 references, I assume, so we could call them and do all that. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we did not, every evaluator did not call every reference, but one of the staff, Atherton staff, did call the references of the top-ranked firm, and we received positive comments.
Yeah, because one of my, and you so graciously gave me the ratings for these, but 2 of the evaluators didn't have any scores down for any of the feedback from references, so we can't qualify them. And then there's another one that only one person did, and of course, as you mentioned, the 4th one didn't do it. So that answers that question. Also in the scoring, I think it was number 2, it was radically different, at least for Cal Engineering versus the other ones. Everybody was in the 6, 7, 8 range, and suddenly this one's down, somebody's rating them down to number 3 and number 5, gave them out of 10. So I thought that was kind of unusual. I'd like to see that difference, but I'd like to see it a little tighter, because everybody else rated them tighter.
Well, and actually, I can speak directly to that because that evaluator was me.
Okay.
And one of the things that, each of them, we don't have a lot of criteria on, okay, if you do this, or if they do this, you get this amount of points. I mean, everybody, grades people differently. I'm a hard grader. And, the important thing there is that although I may give one firm a 5 on something, 2 other people may give them 7s. What's important is how we rank them, because really when you think about it, the numerical values that I'm using, it's consistent across the board. The numerical values that another evaluator is doing is consistent across the board.
Okay.
So even though our numbers may be different, the ranking is really what is important. And that's why, you know, when we get together, you know, we do the evaluations independently, but when we get together as a team, you know, what I talk to them about is, okay, tell me your number 1, 2, 3 ranked firms. And then we talk about those rankings, not about why did I give them a 3 and you gave them a 7.
Okay, all right. So in looking then at the detailed work plan, which starts on page 21 of 27, so I guess there are a number of obligations that they've put on top of us. And so we feel very comfortable with meeting those and not delaying them, which would then cause us to potentially pay. And then you answered the question already on BFK. When I looked over, I guess they had a number of design assumptions or assumptions associated with theirs. I assume that you guys looked over those and they helped you with your evaluation criteria. But again, you know, when I called and I read the staff report says, you know, I'm going to paraphrase it. It just essentially says in the first one they're going to look over the designs that we made, that we previously had, and there were 2, and you've called them out in the RFP, and then subsequently they're also going to do a walkthrough, and then they're going to do a design. So for $92,000, they're going to look at what we've already done, and then they're just going to do a walkthrough, because it says that they're just going to do a field review, which will be limited to visual inspection of the existing facilities. Material testing will not be included in the current scope of work, so there's no destructive or non-destructive testing, et cetera, or any specific type. So I got the impression that, you know, for $92,000, we might get a little bit more, because they go on to say that, you know, they're going to look at some stuff, but actually they're going to be taking measurements using Google Maps and things like that, as opposed to, you know, more or less kind of doing real work.
And if that's the impression you got, then I apologize, because we didn't do a very good job describing the scope in the staff report, because they're going to be doing much more. I mean, they aren't going to be doing the things you're referencing with regards to the non-destructive and destructive testing. And that's because the geotechnical work that was done by URS in a previous consultant agreement with the town back in 2007, 2008, they are going to be using that work because that work is still valid. Because the work that was done by URS is now 5 years old, we wanted them to update and do another field reconnaissance to give us their professional opinion of the urgency of the need to make the repairs. And really the primary cost involved in the $92,000 for this phase 1 isn't really the review of other people's work and their field reconnaissance. It's really that it's really the work that's going to be required to develop 5 or 6 different alternatives, identifying comparative costs for each one of those alternatives. They're not going to be using Google Maps. They're going to be doing actual field topographic surveys. Design level surveys, which we need in order for them to do a 35% design on the alternative that ultimately the city council is going to review and approve. They're also going to be doing the necessary environmental studies for whatever the selected alternative is. As part of that also is taking a look at what the regulatory permitting requirements are going to be. And then also to do that 35% design, and that, to do a 35% design after you've already gone through and done kind of an alternatives analysis on 5 to 6 different ways of doing this, it does represents a significant amount of work.
Well, to me,
No, go ahead.
okay. So it just seems to me that for what they're doing for the initial 92,000, it doesn't seem a heck of a lot of work. Did they give you in their proposal? They gave you detailed timelines and workload analysis. So did you how many man-hours are involved in the potential $92,000 worth of spending?
No, they did, I didn't bring that with me tonight.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine. I would think that that would be one of the things that we would evaluate, how many man-hours they're putting in. Are we having our arborist do this work that's in item number 22 in the design assumptions? It says the arborist will provide documentation on existing trees and prepare recommendations for the preservation in an informal existing tree report for use by the design team. So it sounds to me like it's our arborist, because, of course, we didn't have the whole detailed proposal.
No, this would be an arborist, this would not be a town's arborist, this would be an arborist provided by, as part of the consultant team.
And so how do we know it's gonna be roughly 204,000?
Well, we don't. I mean, this is a time and materials contract. One of the reasons for going through a qualifications-based process is what we're looking for is really who we believe is the most technically competent firm to do the work. In this case, we don't have that ability on staff. Even though David Wynn, your engineer, is licensed, he does not have that capability. I'm licensed, I have 35 years' experience, and although my license would allow me to do this kind of work professionally, I know that I'm not the person, I don't feel qualified to do this kind of work. So, you know, that's why we go through this process, and, you know, we rely on them to develop what we believe is a reasonable, you know, scope of work with reasonable estimate of hours. But again, it's on a time and materials basis, and so they will only be paid for the work and hours that they perform. One of the things that, you know, and so as I mentioned to you yesterday, there is no formula on, you know, how much it should cost, because every project is different. One of the ways that, you know, you can determine whether or not the costs are in the ballpark is taking a look at the design fee, which means the fee required to actually prepare construction plan specification and estimates. Compare that to the construction cost. And in this case, you know, the total fee of $205,000, if you assume, and again, we do not know the actual cost of this, that's why we want to go through this work and take a look at alternatives, but the number that was estimated in the past was about $2.4 to $2.5 million. If you use that, then the $204,000 represents a fee of about 8.5%. The design fee is 8.5% of construction, and that's in the ballpark. I mean, again, depending on the size, depending on the type of project, depending on the construction value of the project, you know, the design can vary anywhere from 5% to over 20%. And so, you know, at 8.5%, you know, we felt that seemed reasonable.
Well, I think that, I'm not qualified to say whether it's reasonable or not. It's substantially larger than somewhere in the discussions on the capital plan. I believe I was led to believe that it might cost, but again, you know, since we already had the two studies, it seems a little bit high, and it looks like, even as you said, you know, we don't have a great deal of specificity, although they've given us some pretty good, you know, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, and they've given us a lot of things that they're not including in the bid, which I'm always concerned when I read what people, the list of what they're not going to give us, or what will be extra, is greater than the list of what they're going to deliver. That always raises a little flag. And, you know, for $200,000, it seems to me that maybe, you know, a previous city manager here once told me something when I asked some questions about specificity close enough for government work, and I don't think that should apply. Because I'm not so sure that this is as specific as perhaps it could be, or, you know, maybe a different process should have been, or should be, for these large, multiple hundreds of thousands of dollar projects. Should be a little bit more exacting with detailed analysis. That's my own personal opinion, but but I think that, you know, from projects that I've run, not within towns, but for government agencies, federal government agencies and things like that, you know, you want to have everything nailed down to the bottom line so we can get a good feeling for it, so.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
we are sure that we're talking about the 92,000. The 204,000 is totally speculative and is not part of anything that we're talking about.
Well, I'm looking at their proposal, yes, so that's for the 92,000. Their proposal, I assume, is for the 92,000.
That's all.
I still think that the documentation that they
The
provide.
92,000 is a not to exceed number, it could be less, but it can't be more.
Yeah, okay, but, okay, good, good. Sure.
Oh, and I guess, you're saying, Mike, that part of this is, that they will come up with, you said 3, 4, 5 different scenarios to repair the wall, as part of this fee. And I guess that's assuming that the wall needs to be repaired. And we're assuming that the wall needs repaired, that the wall is falling down, right? Or is there a possibility that they'll do some analysis of the wall and say, gee, you know, it's not broke right now, so why fix it at this point? Is that a possibility?
That is a possibility, but, you know, and that's what started this, is that back in 2006 or 7, I believe, the town did have to do an emergency repair. And my understanding is that's what prompted the 2008 contract with URS to look into even more. And that's why, as part of this scope of work, we do want them to do a reconnaissance level review, which means basically a visual, and to give us their opinion on whether or not, you know, the entire section of this wall does need to be repaired. My guess is given the age, given the type of construction, given that it's going to be there for a long, long time, that it probably, you know, does. But that's part of the assessment that we will be bringing back to the city council.
And so why do we need 5 different scenarios?